Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Nature channel. Tonight, we are going on a very special journey, not through a forest or across the ocean, but along the quiet, invisible lines that hold the world together. Did you know that a pile of sand on a beach, a giant pyramid built thousands of years ago in Egypt, and a mountain of snow on a faraway peak all share exactly the same secret angle? The same gentle slope, the same quiet tilt toward the sky. Nature figured out the perfect shape long before people did, and tonight we are going to discover it together, one soft grain of sand at a time. So find your most comfortable position. Let your body settle into whatever is beneath you, a mattress, a sofa, a warm blanket. Take one slow, easy breath in and let it go. There is nowhere to be tonight. There is nothing to do. There is only this, the soft, ancient geometry of the earth, waiting to tell you its most peaceful secret. Close your eyes a little. Let your shoulders drop. And let us begin. Somewhere on a quiet beach where the water has pulled back for the evening and left the sand damp and smooth, someone lets a handful of dry sand fall from their open palm. Just a small handful. They hold their hand up, not very high, just a little above the ground, and open their fingers slowly. The sand pours down in a thin, whispering stream. It lands, it piles, and it forms the most perfect, tiny little hill you have ever seen, round on all sides, equal in every direction. A miniature mountain, no taller than a thumb. And here is the first secret of tonight. That little hill always makes the same angle. No matter where you are in the world, no matter what kind of sand, no matter how slowly or quickly it falls, the slope of that tiny hill, from its peak down to where it meets the flat ground, is almost always around 30 to 35 degrees. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but always, always in that same quiet neighborhood of angles. Scientists call this the angle of repose. It is the angle at which gravity and friction agree with each other, the point where sliding down and staying in place reach a kind of peace. Think of it like a conversation between two forces. Gravity pulls each grain of sand downward, saying, move, fall, go lower. And friction, the tiny rough surfaces of all those little grains pressing against each other, says, wait, stay, hold on. The angle of repose is where they stop arguing, where they settle into stillness together. Dry sand finds its angle of repose around 30 to 34 degrees. Wet sand, because the water makes the grains stick together a little more, can hold a steeper angle, sometimes up to 45 degrees. That is why a sandcastle stays up when it is damp and crumbles when it dries. The angle of repose shifted quietly beneath it. Right now, your own body is finding its angle of repose, the place where tension stops and rest begins. Let your hands grow heavy. Let your jaw soften. The same law that governs mountains and pyramids is gently at work in you right now, asking everything to settle a little lower. Different materials have different angles of repose. A pile of smooth marbles can only hold about a 15-degree slope before they roll away from each other. A pile of rough gravel can hold up to 45 degrees because all those jagged edges catch and grip. Even snow has its own angle of repose, and when fresh powder piles on a steep slope beyond that angle, it lets go. It becomes an avalanche, not out of anger, simply because the conversation between gravity and friction came to its natural end. Coal, which is made of ancient compressed plants from forests that existed hundreds of millions of years ago, has an angle of repose around 35 to 40 degrees. Workers who design storage piles in coal yards must know this angle precisely, because they are essentially building small pyramids, and every pyramid obeys the same quiet physics. Salt crystals, which are perfectly cube-shaped, stack at an angle of repose close to 32 degrees. The tiny flat faces of each crystal find each other and settle into a gentle, stable slope. If you have ever seen a salt dome or a mound of sea salt at a market, you have seen the angle of repose at rest, shining white in the light. Flour, which is made of particles so fine they almost behave like a liquid, has a very low angle of repose, sometimes only 20 degrees. That is why flour slides so easily from a spoon. It has very little friction to hold it in place. Corn kernels, round and smooth, rest at around 27 degrees. Wheat, which is slightly longer and rougher, holds it closer to 28. Farmers and grain engineers have known these numbers for generations, even before they had a name for them. They knew by feeling, by watching, by the gentle experience of pouring grain into barns and bins and seeing what shape the pile made. River gravel, those smooth, rounded stones you find at the bottom of clear streams, settles at about 35 to 40 degrees. The roundness means less friction. The weight means more stability. Each stone finds its neighbor. Each neighbor finds the ground. And together they form a quiet hill that does not wish to go anywhere at all. Imagine lying beside such a stream, the sound of water moving over those same round stones, each one in its perfect place, held there by the gentlest physics in the world. The light fading slowly through the trees above, the angle of everything around you, the bank, the stones, the slope of the earth toward the water, all of it settled, all of it at rest. Sand dunes in deserts are perhaps the most beautiful, large-scale expression of the angle of repose that you can see from the ground. The windward side of a dune, the side the wind pushes against, is always long and gentle, with a low angle. But the leeward side, where sand is constantly being deposited by the wind and sliding down, maintains almost exactly the angle of repose for that particular sand. On the great dunes of the Sahara, that slip face holds a slope of about 32 to 34 degrees, hundreds of meters tall, miles wide, and yet obeying exactly the same rule as that tiny handful on the beach. The Sahara Desert covers over 9 million square kilometers, roughly the size of the United States. Within it, the sand dune regions called ergs cover only about a quarter of that area. The rest is mostly flat gravel plains, rocky plateaus, and dry riverbeds. And yet, it is the dunes that we picture when we close our eyes and think of the desert, the slopes, the curves, the geometry that looks like it was made by a careful, patient hand. At the very tip of a sand dune slip face, individual grains are always in motion, tumbling slowly down, landing, stopping, waiting for the next grain to nudge them forward. It is the most patient kind of motion in the world. Each grain has been moving this way for thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years, carried by wind, lifted, dropped, settling always into the same angle, the same quiet geometry, over and over, forever. And right now, somewhere in the Sahara, a grain of sand is doing exactly this, tumbling down the face of a dune in the dark, landing softly, finding its place in the great slow pile. No one is watching, no one needs to. The angle of repose takes care of everything. Now, let us travel very gently from that quiet desert beach all the way to the banks of the Nile River, to a place where the air is dry and golden, and the stars at night are so thick they look like scattered salt, to Egypt, to the plateau of Giza, where 4,500 years ago, something extraordinary began to take shape against the sky. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the one known as the Pyramid of Khufu, rises to a height of about 138 meters today. When it was first completed, it stood at 146.5 meters, making it the tallest structure made by human hands on Earth. It held that record for nearly 4,000 years. Think about that for a moment. For 4,000 years, nothing humans built reached higher. Not a cathedral, not a tower, not a monument of any kind. Just this ancient, patient pyramid sitting quietly on its plateau, watching civilizations rise and fall around it. The angle of the Great Pyramid's slope, the angle of its faces rising from the base to the tip, is approximately 51.8 degrees, sometimes rounded to 52 degrees when people speak of it. This is the number at the heart of tonight's story. And when you hear it alongside the angle of repose, that natural settling angle of sand and stone and grain, something quietly remarkable begins to emerge. The base of the Great Pyramid covers an area of about 53,000 square meters. That is roughly the size of 8 city blocks. Each side is about 230 meters long. The precision with which those sides were laid out is extraordinary. The difference in length between the longest and shortest sides is less than 8 centimeters across a span of 230 meters. That is an accuracy of about 0.03%. In the ancient world, without satellite measurements or laser levels, this was achieved through careful observation of the stars and the most patient, methodical stonework imaginable. The limestone blocks that make up most of the pyramid weigh an average of about 2.5 tons each. Some of the interior stones are much heavier. The granite blocks in the king's chamber weigh between 25 and 80 tons. There are approximately 2.3 million blocks in the entire structure, and they were quarried, transported, shaped, and placed in the desert under the sun over a period of about 20 years by an organized society of workers who knew exactly what angle to aim for. Whether or not the ancient Egyptians consciously chose 51.8 degrees because they understood something about natural geometry, or whether they arrived at it through practical experimentation, is a question that still inspires quiet wonder. What we do know is that a slope close to this angle feels stable. It feels right. It has a visual weight and proportion that seems to belong to the natural world, not just to human ambition. From a distance, the pyramid does not look like a man-made thing. It looks like something the desert might have made itself. A hill that grew too perfectly, a dune that forgot to be soft. And perhaps that is not an accident. Perhaps the builders, consciously or not, were tuning their work to a frequency that the earth itself already understood. Let your breathing slow a little now. Picture that pyramid at night, lit by a sky so clear and dark that the stars cast faint shadows on the limestone. The desert is quiet. A warm wind moves across the sand and makes the softest sound. At the base of the pyramid, grains of sand drift and settle, and the slope of those tiny drifts, 32 degrees, rhymes in some deep, unspoken way with the slope of the stones above them. 52 degrees. Two different materials, two different forces. both obeying the same quiet authority of gravity and friction and rest. The pyramid is not alone on the Giza Plateau. It is joined by the pyramid of Khafre, which appears taller because it stands on slightly higher ground, though it is actually a little shorter. Khafre's pyramid has a slope of about 53.1 degrees, just a fraction steeper than Khufu's. And the smallest of the three main Giza pyramids, the Pyramid of Menkore, rises at about 51.3 degrees. Three pyramids, three slightly different angles, but all of them clustered around the same quiet neighborhood, the 50s, the same range where the forces of nature seem to settle into their most balanced, lasting shapes. Nearby, the great Sphinx rests in its famous pose. Body low, head lifted, gaze pointed toward the rising sun. The Sphinx is carved directly from the bedrock of the plateau, from a single massive outcrop of limestone that the builders shaped rather than built. It is about 73 meters long and 20 meters tall. Looking at it, you might notice that even its reclined body forms a gentle, stable slope. The back line of the Sphinx rising from tail to shoulders at a long, easy angle, like a hill that chose to have a face. If you were to fall asleep on the sand near the base of the Sphinx tonight, you would wake to the sunrise coming exactly over its left shoulder. The ancient Egyptians oriented their monuments with extraordinary care, aligning them to the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And yet, beneath all that cosmic precision, the fundamental physics was always the same: stone stacked at an angle where it would not fall, geometry that agreed with gravity, a shape that had permission to last. The Nile River, which flows just a few kilometers from the Giza Plateau, has been depositing sediment for millions of years. On its banks, natural levees, low ridges of silt built up by repeated flooding, form at angles that reflect the angle of repose of river sediment, usually between 5 and 15 degrees, much gentler than the pyramid, but built by the same invisible hand, the same conversation between falling and staying, the same patient physics that the pyramid builders somehow knew or felt or simply saw in the shape of the world around them and decided to make permanent. If you feel your eyes growing heavier now, that is perfectly good. This story will be here. The pyramids have waited 4,000 years. They can wait a little longer. Just let your body settle into its own angle of repose, the place where you feel most held, most still. Now we travel west, across the Atlantic, across centuries, into the green and ancient heartland of Mexico and Central America, where another civilization was building pyramids of their own, without any contact with Egypt, without any knowledge of what was happening on the other side of the world. They were following the same invisible thread, the same geometry that the earth itself had already drawn. The Maya built hundreds of pyramids across a vast territory that included modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. They built in the jungle, which makes what they achieved even more remarkable. The forest was always pressing in, always trying to reclaim what had been cleared. And yet, these structures have lasted for more than 1,000 years, some of them for more than 2,000. The Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, also known as El Castillo, stands about 30 meters tall. Its four sides face precisely the four cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. And its slope, rising from the broad base to the flat top, measures approximately 53 degrees, just 1 degree more than the Great Pyramid of Giza. On the other side of the world, built by people who had never heard of Egypt, never seen the Nile, never spoken a word of the same language. And yet, they arrived at almost exactly the same angle. When you stand at the base of El Castillo and look up, the staircase rises at a slope that feels steep, almost challenging. But the pyramid itself, viewed from a distance, looks stable, settled, like it belongs to the ground beneath it. The proportions feel natural, the way a hill feels natural, the way a dune feels natural. Because in some very real sense, they are obeying the same natural law. The Pyramid of Kukulkan has a remarkable property connected to the movements of the sun. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, the 2 days each year, when day and night are exactly equal, the sunlight falls on the northwest corner of the pyramid in a way that creates a series of triangular shadows along the north staircase balustrade. These shadows, combined with the carved serpent heads at the base of the staircase, create the illusion of a great feathered serpent descending toward the earth. It lasts for only a few hours, and then the light moves on and the serpent disappears for another 6 months. The Mayan calendar, one of the most precise calendrical systems ever developed, was capable of tracking astronomical cycles with extraordinary accuracy. The Maya knew the length of the solar year to a precision of about 0.0002 days. They tracked the movements of Venus across the sky over long cycles of 584 days. They understood that the Earth itself had a very long rhythmic wobble, the precession of the equinoxes, which takes about 26,000 years to complete. People who were watching the sky this carefully were also people who understood the geometry of light, of shadow, of slope, and of angle. Not far from Chichen Itza, the ancient city of Uxmal contains another remarkable pyramid, the Pyramid of the Magician. Unlike most pyramids, which have flat sides, the Pyramid of the Magician has rounded sides. It is elliptical rather than square in cross-section. Its slope is unusually steep, close to 60 degrees on the main face, and yet it has stood for over 1,000 years without collapsing. The reason is the quality of the stonework. The interior is densely packed rubble, and the outer stones are precisely fitted. The steeper angle is compensated for by the internal structure, which distributes the weight in ways that keep the whole thing stable. According to the legend attached to this pyramid, it was built in a single night by a dwarf who had been hatched from an egg. Of course, it was not built in a single night, but the legend tells us something true, that to the people who lived near it, the pyramid seemed like something that could not have been made by ordinary human hands. It seemed like it had appeared, like it had always been there, like it had grown from the earth the way a hill grows, the way a dune grows, by the quiet authority of natural law. Farther south, in the Guatemalan highlands, the ancient Maya city of Tikal contains pyramids that rise out of the jungle canopy like stone fingers pointing at the sky. Temple 1, also called the Temple of the Great Jaguar, rises to about 47 meters, steep, narrow, and dramatic. Its slope on the main staircase face approaches 70 degrees. From the top, you can look out over an unbroken sea of tree canopy stretching in every direction. The calls of howler monkeys rise from somewhere below. The air smells of soil and moss and morning rain. and the pyramid beneath your feet holds perfectly still. At Tikal, archaeologists have found evidence of astronomical observatories built into the layout of the city itself. 3 temples are positioned so that from the top of one, you can watch the sun rise directly over the top of another on the spring equinox. The people who built these temples were not just making homes for their gods. They were making instruments for reading the sky, enormous stone instruments, calibrated over generations of careful watching. The pyramid form, it turns out, is one of the most structurally efficient shapes that can be built using stacked materials. A wide base distributes the weight over a large area. Each layer above is slightly smaller and lighter than the one below. So the structure gets gradually more stable as it grows. The angle of the slope, whether 52 degrees or 53 or 51, determines how quickly the pyramid tapers, and different slopes produce different proportions of beauty and structural efficiency. But they all work, they all last, because they are all conversations with gravity, and gravity is a very patient, very consistent partner. If you are still with us, dear friend, if your eyes are still open just a little, we would love for you to leave a comment below and let us know where you are listening from tonight. And if this is helping you find your way toward sleep, a gentle like means the world to us. Thank you for being here. The angle of repose is not only found in sand and stone. It lives in everything that piles, settles, drifts, or rests. It is found in the living world as much as in the mineral one. And once you know to look for it, you begin to see it everywhere, in the shapes that nature makes quietly, without effort, simply by letting gravity and friction do their slow and patient work. Consider the termite mound. Termites are tiny insects, each one smaller than a grain of rice. But together, a colony of hundreds of thousands of individuals can build a mound that rises 3 to 4 meters into the air, sometimes taller. Some species in Australia build mounds over 6 meters high. These mounds are made of soil particles, termite saliva, and fecal matter, all pressed together into a hard, almost cement-like material. They are extraordinarily strong, and the slopes of termite mounds, especially around the base where the mound widens, typically correspond to the angle of repose of the soil in that region. The termites are not doing geometry deliberately, but the materials they work with obey the same physical laws, and so the mounds they build end up looking, from a distance, surprisingly like pyramids. Termite mounds serve as more than just homes. They are sophisticated climate control systems. The tall central chimney allows hot air to rise and escape, while cooler air enters through vents near the base. Inside, the temperature stays remarkably constant, even when the outside temperature swings wildly between day and night. Some species keep the interior at exactly 30 to 31 degrees Celsius year-round. The mound is a living building, regulated not by a thermostat, but by the collective behavior of millions of tiny creatures who have never seen a blueprint. The exterior of a termite mound is not smooth. It is covered in tiny ridges, channels, and bumps that direct rainwater away from the surface and prevent erosion. When rain falls on a steep, smooth mound, it runs off quickly and can wash material away. But the ridged surface breaks the water into small streams, slows it down, and guides it gently to the base. The mound maintains its shape not by being rigid, but by being cleverly textured. It works with the rain rather than against it. Inside the mound, there are farms. Termite species called fungus growers cultivate gardens of a specific fungus called termitomyces. They bring plant material inside, chew it up, and spread it in their fungal gardens. The fungus digests the plant material and produces nutrients that the termites then eat. This partnership between termite and fungus is about 30 million years old. Neither could survive without the other, and the gardens are kept inside the mound at precisely the right temperature and humidity for the fungus to thrive. Now, move from the termite mound to the beaver dam. Beavers are one of the few animals besides humans that dramatically reshape their environment. A beaver dam is built from branches, mud, and stones, wedged together across a flowing stream to create a still pond. The upstream face of the dam, the face that holds the water back, is typically built at an angle that relates closely to the stability requirements of wet mud and interlocked branches. A slope gentle enough not to collapse, steep enough not to sprawl too wide, usually somewhere between 30 and 45 degrees. The angle of repose, again, working quietly behind the scenes. A beaver pond can cover several acres. It creates wetland habitat that supports dozens of other species: frogs, fish, ducks, herons, otters, moose. The still water recharges groundwater supplies. It captures sediment, improving water quality downstream. A single beaver family, in the course of building their home, creates an entire ecosystem. Their angle of repose becomes the angle of a community. Beavers' teeth never stop growing. They are orange because of iron compounds in the enamel, which makes them harder and more durable. A beaver can fell a 10-centimeter wide tree in less than 5 minutes. They work mostly at night, and they seem to prefer willow, aspen, and birch, trees with a soft, fast-growing wood that provides both building material and food. In winter, when the pond freezes over, the beaver family lives in its lodge beneath the ice, warm and safe, eating the bark of branches they stored underwater in autumn, like a pantry beneath the pond's still surface. The lodge itself, the domed structure built from branches and mud that the beavers live in, has a similar proportion to a termite mound, and, you might be noticing by now, to a pyramid. The dome is tallest at the center and slopes outward to the water at a gentle angle. Rain runs off it, snow accumulates on it, and provides extra insulation. The shape is not designed. It is arrived at. It is the shape that stacked wet branches make when piled by animals who are driven by instinct to make the walls as thick and stable as possible. Geometry without architects. Stability without blueprints. Ant colonies build their nests in soil with remarkable structural intelligence. The entrance holes of ant nests are typically surrounded by a small ring of excavated soil piled in a gentle cone, a miniature volcano shape. The slope of this cone is usually 30 to 35 degrees. The angle of repose of loose soil. When it rains, the cone channels water away from the entrance. When wind blows, the cone disperses it. The ant heap is a tiny, perfect expression of the same physical law that governs dunes and pyramids. Some species of ants build structures that look remarkably like pyramids from above, with a broad base, gently sloping sides, and a flattened top that serves as a kind of solar collector to warm the colony in the morning. Mound ants, common in European forests, build mounds up to 1 meter tall and 2 meters wide. The outer layer of plant material is arranged so that rain runs off efficiently, and the interior stays warm and dry. The mound faces south to catch the most sunlight. It is a tiny monument of the same kind of thinking, even without a thinking brain, that produced the Great Pyramids. Let your body sink a little heavier now into whatever it is resting on. Imagine being very small, the size of an ant, and looking up at one of those mounds. It would seem enormous, a great mountain, perfectly shaped, warm in the morning sun. And inside it, thousands of small creatures going about their quiet, ordered lives. Everything in its place, everything at rest, everything obeying the same gentle law. Now we go even further back in time, before the termites, before the beavers, before even the first humans, all the way back to a world before animals, when the only things shaping the earth were wind, water, heat, and time, to the world of volcanoes. A volcano, in its simplest form, is a vent in the earth's crust through which molten rock rises from the deep interior. When this molten rock reaches the surface and cools, it solidifies into new land, layer by layer, over thousands or millions of years. A volcano builds itself up from the ocean floor or from a flat plain until it rises high above everything around it. And the shape it makes, the shape of a classic cone-shaped volcanic mountain, is one of the most recognizable on Earth. The slope of a volcanic cone depends almost entirely on the type of material it erupts. Volcanoes that produce thick, slow-moving lava build steep, narrow cones, sometimes called lava domes or stratovolcanoes, because the lava does not flow far before it cools and stops. The angle of repose for cooling lava and volcanic rock can be between 30 and 40 degrees. Volcanoes that produce thinner, more fluid lava build very shallow, wide shields, like a warrior's shield laid face down on the ground, because the lava flows far and flat before stopping. The slope of a shield volcano might be only 5 to 10 degrees. Mount Fuji, the iconic volcano and highest mountain in Japan, is a stratovolcano rising 3,776 meters above sea level. Its nearly perfect symmetrical cone shape has made it a symbol of beauty and natural order for thousands of years. Artists have painted it hundreds of times. It appears on currency, in poetry, in the names of companies and sports teams. And its average slope, measured from base to summit, is approximately 27 degrees, close to the angle of repose of volcanic ash and cinders, which is exactly what much of its outer surface is made of. Mount Fuji is still technically active. Its last eruption was in 1707. During that eruption, it deposited volcanic ash over a wide area and significantly altered its own shape. But in the centuries since, the mountain has settled quietly back into its role as a symbol of stillness and endurance. It is climbed by hundreds of thousands of people each year, mostly during the summer months. From the summit on a clear morning, you can see the curve of the horizon and, in the distance, the shimmer of the Pacific Ocean. The island of Hawaii is built almost entirely from volcanic material. The main island sits atop a hot spot in the Earth's mantle, a plume of exceptionally hot rock that melts its way through the crust and has been producing volcanic islands for tens of millions of years. As the Pacific tectonic plate slowly moves over this hot spot, new islands form and old ones are carried away to the northwest. The chain of islands that results, including Kauai, Oahu, Maui, and the Big Island, stretches across nearly 2,500 kilometers of ocean and represents about 70 million years of volcanic activity. The Big Island of Hawaii is home to Mauna Kea, which rises 4,205 meters above sea level, but if measured from its base on the ocean floor, it reaches 10,210 meters, making it the tallest mountain on Earth from base to summit. Its broad, gently sloping flanks, typical of a shield volcano, make it look more like a sleeping giant than a sharp peak. And at its summit, because of the thin, dry air, some of the world's most powerful telescopes are built. From the top of the world's tallest mountain, scientists look outward into the farthest reaches of the universe. Above them, stars. Below them, ocean. And beneath all of it, the quiet, patient heartbeat of the Earth's interior. Volcanic islands often have black sand beaches, a sight that is both strange and beautiful. Black sand is formed when lava enters the ocean and is instantly shattered by the cold water into tiny fragments of basalt. These fragments are then tumbled smooth by wave action over time. A black sand beach forms in a geological eye blink, sometimes in a matter of years after a lava flow reaches the sea. And the black sand, like any sand, piles at the angle of repose, the same 32 to 34 degrees, on a beach that did not exist 100 years ago, built from rock that came from the center of the earth, obeying the same quiet law as the oldest desert in the world. Picture that beach right now, the black sand, warm and smooth and strange, the sound of gentle waves arriving and pulling back, the sky overhead, deep blue, the color of deep water, and somewhere above it, the summit of a sleeping volcano. Everything formed by heat and time, and the patient settling of material into its most stable shape. Everything at rest. If you are finding this playlist helpful for sleep or relaxation, we would love for you to explore the full collection. There is a whole world of quiet nature waiting for you there. And if you have a friend who has trouble sleeping, perhaps share this with them. Sometimes the best gift is simply a soft voice in the dark. The volcanic rock that makes up most of the ocean floor is called basalt. It is dark gray to black, dense and fine-grained, formed when lava cools quickly in contact with the ocean. The oceanic crust is entirely made of basalt, ranging from about 6 to 10 kilometers thick. It is much thinner than continental crust, which can be 30 to 70 kilometers thick. But it is also heavier, which is why when oceanic crust and continental crust collide, the oceanic crust sinks beneath the continental one, a process called subduction. As it sinks into the hot mantle, it melts and eventually rises again, feeding the volcanoes along the edges of continents. The Pacific Ring of Fire, a horseshoe-shaped zone around the edges of the Pacific Ocean, is the site of about 75% of the world's active volcanoes and about 90% of the world's earthquakes. The Ring of Fire exists because the Pacific Plate is surrounded by subduction zones, where it dives beneath the plates around it. Every one of those subduction zones produces volcanoes, and every one of those volcanoes in its own way builds the same kinds of shapes, the same slopes, the same stable geometries, because they are all subject to the same gravity, the same friction, the same patient laws that govern everything that piles and settles and rests. Let us rest now from volcanoes and ancient pyramids and take a quieter path. Let us walk into a forest after rain. The trees are tall and dark-trunked, their canopy high overhead, their roots deep and quiet in the wet earth. The path is soft underfoot. Somewhere a bird calls once and then stops. The air smells of soil and green things and the particular sweetness of rain absorbed by leaves. Look down at the forest floor. It is carpeted with fallen leaves, brown and gold, and sometimes still faintly green at the stem. They have fallen from the trees above and settled on the ground in layers, a thin layer of this autumn over the slightly thicker layer of last autumn, over the compressed, darkening layer of the autumn before that, all the way down to the soil itself, which is made of autumns beyond counting. Each layer is compressed a little more by the weight above it. The angles at which leaves lie on the forest floor are gentle, very close to flat, because leaves are large and flat themselves and settle almost horizontally. But where they pile against roots, against rocks, against the base of trees, they form small ramps and slopes that always echo the angle of repose of that particular material. Soil itself is a living thing. A teaspoon of healthy forest soil contains more living organisms than there are people on Earth. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, mites, springtails, all of them moving through the soil, eating, reproducing, breaking down dead material, transforming it into nutrients that can be taken up by plants. The soil is not just a medium that plants grow in. It is a community, an ecosystem, a world within a world, all of it happening in darkness, in the slow, warm quiet beneath our feet. The angle at which a forest slope holds soil, without it washing away in heavy rain, depends on the density of plant roots. Roots hold soil together through friction, exactly as the rough surfaces of gravel hold each other together. A forest slope can maintain a stable angle of 35 to 40 degrees because the roots of trees, grasses, ferns, and mosses weave through the soil and add an enormous amount of friction. Remove the plants through logging, fire, or drought, and the soil's effective angle of repose drops dramatically. A bare slope at 35 degrees will erode quickly. The same slope with intact plant cover will hold for centuries. This is why the roots of trees are one of the most important things in the world, not just for the tree itself, but for the mountain it stands on. In regions where forests have been cleared from steep hillsides, landslides become far more common. The soil has lost its binding, its angle of repose has shifted, and what was once stable becomes, slowly or suddenly, unstable. The mountain is always listening for the state of its roots. Some tree roots go remarkably deep. The wild fig tree of South Africa has been found growing roots down to 120 meters, the deepest roots ever recorded. Most trees, however, spread their roots wide and shallow rather than deep. The roots of a mature beech tree can extend outward 20 to 30 meters from the base of the trunk, weaving through the soil in a wide, flat network that holds the tree steady against wind and holds the hillside steady against rain. The sound of rain falling on a forest is one of the most soothing sounds in the natural world, and there is physics behind why it sounds the way it does. Raindrops falling on leaves of different sizes produce different sounds. The large, flat leaves of tropical plants produce a soft pattering, while the small, stiff needles of pine trees produce a higher, more constant hiss. The combined effect of rain on a mature forest canopy, with its dozens of different leaf types and sizes, is a complex, layered sound that researchers have found to reduce cortisol levels, the hormone associated with stress, in listeners, even when heard through a recording. Rain itself falls in drops of different sizes depending on the intensity of the storm. Light drizzle produces drops about 0.2 millimeters in diameter. Heavy rain produces drops up to 5 or 6 millimeters across. When a very large raindrop falls more than about 4 millimeters, it flattens slightly as it descends. The air resistance pushes up on the bottom of the drop and gives it the shape of a hamburger bun, rather than the teardrop shape we usually picture. Only the very smallest drops are truly round. The rest are all slightly flattened, slightly settled. Even a raindrop is finding its angle of repose on the way down. Water falling through a forest canopy is transformed by the time it reaches the forest floor. Some is absorbed by leaves. Some runs down branches to the trunk and then down the trunk to the ground. This is called stem flow. Some drips from leaf tips in fat drops called through fall. By the time rain reaches the forest floor, it has been slowed, filtered, and distributed. Rather than hitting bare soil in a concentrated impact that would disturb the surface and create erosion, it arrives gently, diffused, softened by the canopy above. The forest is not just holding the hillside together with its roots. It is also managing the water that could undermine those roots, catching it, slowing it, distributing it. Moss, which grows on rocks and the bases of trees in shaded, moist forests, is one of the most ancient types of plants on Earth. The first mosses appeared about 470 million years ago, making them among the earliest land plants. They have no roots, only tiny anchor threads called rhizoids. And yet, they can hold a surprising amount of water in their dense, spongy bodies. A patch of moss can absorb up to 20 times its dry weight in water. After a rain, it releases that water slowly, keeping the ground and the air around it moist long after the rain has stopped. Lying on a bed of forest moss is, by many accounts, one of the most comfortable natural surfaces there is. The moss is soft and slightly springy. It conforms to your shape. It smells clean and faintly earthy. The ground beneath it is cool and stable. You would be lying on something that has been growing in this spot, undisturbed, perhaps for decades, surrounded by the roots and leaves and soil and rain of a system that has been finding its balance, its own angle of repose, for a very long time. There is a pyramid in the Americas that most people have never heard of, and it is the largest pyramid on Earth, not by height, but by volume. It is called the Great Pyramid of Cholula, and it sits in the state of Puebla in central Mexico, about 100 kilometers east of Mexico City. It was built not by the Maya, but by a succession of cultures over a period of roughly 1,000 years, from about the 3rd century BCE to the 9th century CE. And it is so large and so overgrown that when the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they thought it was a natural hill. They built a Catholic church on top of it. That church, the Iglesia de Nuestra Señora de los Remedios, still stands on the summit today, and from a distance, the whole structure looks like a hill with a church on it. A gentle green slope rising from the flat valley floor, topped by a white and yellow colonial church against the blue sky. Only when you walk to it and look carefully at certain angles do you see the remnants of the original stonework emerging from beneath the vegetation. The Great Pyramid of Cholula has a base measuring 450 meters on each side, almost twice the base area of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its total volume is approximately 4.45 million cubic meters, compared to Giza's 2.6 million cubic meters. It is the largest single structure ever built by human hands, by volume, and because it was built over many centuries, with each new generation adding a new layer over the previous one like a series of nested boxes. Its final shape was determined not by a single architect, but by the accumulated decisions of hundreds of generations of builders. Its slope, despite all those different hands and all those different centuries, averaged out to approximately 45 degrees on the main faces, right in the middle of the range where natural materials, carefully stacked, find their stability. As if all those generations, building in sequence without a master plan, were each following the same instinct, the same feeling that this angle was right, that this was the conversation between gravity and stone that would last. Underneath the pyramid, archaeologists have excavated about 8 kilometers of tunnels, revealing the interiors of the earlier construction phases. Inside, there are painted murals offering deposits and evidence of ceremonies that span many different cultures and centuries. The pyramid grew through time, the way a pearl grows, each new layer added around the core of the previous one, each generation building on and over what came before. And the whole thing, from the outside, still looks like a hill, a natural hill, a hill that found its angle of repose. In the valley below Cholula, the landscape is flat and agricultural, fields of corn and beans and squash, the same crops that have been grown there for thousands of years. In the Mesoamerican tradition, corn, beans, and squash were known as the three sisters. They were planted together, each one supporting the others. The corn grew tall and provided a stalk for the beans to climb. The beans fixed nitrogen from the air into the soil, fertilizing the ground. The squash spread low along the ground, shading the soil to keep it moist and prevent weeds. Together, the three plants formed a small ecosystem, a community of geometry where each member occupied a different layer, a different height, a different angle of interaction with the sun. When a corn plant grows, it builds itself layer by layer from the ground up, adding a new leaf at each node. Each leaf wraps around the stalk at the node and then unfurls outward and slightly downward. The angle at which corn leaves emerge from the stalk, called the leaf angle, is around 40 to 50 degrees in most modern varieties. This angle determines how much sunlight each leaf can capture and how much it shades the leaves below it. Plant breeders have spent decades studying leaf angle, trying to find the optimal geometry for maximum yield. And the answers they have arrived at through scientific measurement and careful selection are in the same range as the angles of repose, the same family of shapes that grains and sand and stone and pyramids have been using since long before humans arrived. Tall grass on a hillside finds its own angle. In strong wind, grass leans away from the wind, each blade bending at an angle determined by its own flexibility and the force of the air against it. A field of tall grass in wind looks like a conversation, each blade negotiating its own position, bending and springing back, leaning and straightening. From above, the patterns that wind makes in long grass are endlessly shifting like water. From the side, Each blade holds its angle the way a sand dune holds its angle, at the exact point where falling and staying are in balance. A single blade of grass is one of the most elegant structures in the natural world. It is hollow, a tube essentially, giving it great resistance to bending for very little weight. The cells of its wall are arranged in long fibers that run the length of the blade, like the grain in wood, giving it flexibility along the long axis while resisting tearing or splitting. The lower part of the blade, close to the soil where it can be stepped on by animals or cut by lawnmowers, grows from a meristem, a region of growing cells, at the base rather than the tip. This means that when the tip is eaten or cut, the plant does not stop growing. It simply continues from the base. Grass is built to be interrupted and to continue anyway. Let that thought rest with you for a moment. Built to be interrupted and to continue anyway, growing from the base, finding the angle again after every disruption. This might be the most peaceful geometry of all. Let us go now to a place of deep cold and high silence, to a mountain above the tree line, where the rock is bare and the air is thin and the sky is a color of blue that has no name in ordinary language, to the world of talus slopes. A talus slope, sometimes called scree, is a slope covered in broken rock fragments that have fallen from the cliff above. Over thousands or millions of years, frost wedging, thermal expansion, and the slow movement of glaciers crack rocks from cliff faces and send them tumbling down to pile at the base. The resulting slope of broken rock rubble is one of the most dramatic natural expressions of the angle of repose you can see with your own eyes. Talus slopes typically hold an angle of about 35 to 38 degrees. This is the angle of repose of irregular, angular rock fragments of moderate size. The chunks interlock at their rough edges, providing substantial friction, but they are not cemented together, and the slope they form is always at the very edge of stability, just at the point where one more piece of falling rock can be absorbed without triggering a cascade, but barely. Walking on a talus slope is like walking on a living thing. Each footstep shifts a piece. Each shifted piece touches the next. Sometimes a long, slow, crumbling sound follows you. Sometimes nothing moves at all. The animal that is most at home on talus slopes is the pika, a small, round-eared relative of rabbits about the size of a fist. Pikas live at high altitude among the rock piles, where their color, a mottled gray-brown that exactly matches the lichen-covered rocks, makes them almost invisible until they move. They do not hibernate. Instead, in summer and autumn, they gather enormous quantities of vegetation, grasses, wildflowers, sedges, and pile them in the sun to dry, then store them in the rock crevices as winter food. A single pika can gather enough dried plant material to fill a small backpack. The pika's hay piles are placed on rock surfaces angled toward the sun, often oriented at a specific tilt that maximizes solar drying while preventing the hay from blowing away in wind. This is, in essence, a solar panel orientation problem, and the pika solves it intuitively by experience and instinct. The ideal angle for drying hay at the latitude of most pika habitats, between 30 and 40 degrees, turns out to be very close to the angle of the slope itself. The pika's pantry is built into the geometry of its home. Pikas communicate with a sharp, high-pitched call that carries well across open rocky terrain. They are highly territorial and call frequently to signal their presence to neighbors. Recent research has found that pika populations at lower elevations have been moving upslope, climbing higher in search of cooler temperatures as climate warms. Some populations have already reached the summit of their mountains and have nowhere left to go. The pika is one of the species most sensitive to climate change, not because it cannot tolerate warmth directly, but because the cool air beneath the snow that insulates its winter food supply depends on consistent cold temperatures. Above the talus slope, the cliff face from which the rock falls is a vertical world with its own extraordinary residents. Cliff nesting birds, ravens, falcons, swifts, and certain species of owl choose vertical faces precisely because most predators cannot reach them there. A peregrine falcon nesting on a cliff ledge can overlook a vast territory of sky and land below. It can launch from its ledge and reach speeds exceeding 320 kilometers per hour in a dive, the fastest movement of any animal on Earth. And then it returns, finds the ledge again, and folds itself back into stillness with remarkable ease. A falcon at rest on a cliff ledge is the perfect image of an angle of repose. Every feather in its proper place, every muscle at its minimal tension. The falcon is not struggling to stay on the ledge. It is simply there, balanced, its weight distributed exactly right, its grip on the stone firm and effortless. It will stay this way for hours, not sleeping exactly, but resting, watching, being present in the most efficient, effortless way. Mountain glaciers carve their valleys into characteristic U-shapes, steep sides dropping to a broad, flat floor. The steep sides are maintained by the continual erosion of the glacier, which scours the valley walls and keeps them nearly vertical. But when the glacier retreats, leaving the valley behind, the bare rock walls immediately begin to weather and shed material. Talus slopes form at their bases. The valley sides slowly evolve from their glacially carved vertical into the angle of repose of the rock they are made of. Over thousands of years, the sharp U-shape gradually fills in at the bottom and softens at the top, moving toward the stable geometry that the rock and gravity together prefer. The Yosemite Valley in California is a perfect example of a glacially carved valley that is still in the early stages of this transition. El Capitan, the famous sheer granite wall, is still very nearly vertical. At its base, a relatively modest talus slope is beginning to form. The valley is young, as geological time goes, and still wears the raw, vertical geometry of the glacier. But in 1,000,000 years, in 50 million years, the valley will look different. The walls will have retreated and softened. The angles will have settled, and Yosemite will look perhaps more like the ancient rounded highlands of the Appalachian Mountains, where billions of years of weathering have worn the sharp young peaks of an ancient mountain range into gentle, rolling hills. The most settled geology on the continent, the mountains at their angle of repose. If you are still with us now, floating somewhere between waking and sleep, you are exactly where you should be. And if you have a moment, a quiet like or a comment means so much to us. You are part of this small, gentle community of people who love the night and the natural world. Now, let us return to water, not the ocean, we will come to that, but fresh water, lakes, slow rivers, wetlands at dusk, the places where water lies still and the world is reflected in it, doubled, softer, like a memory of the landscape above. The sediment that settles in a lake is one of the most detailed archives of Earth's climate history that exists. Every year, particles of material, soil, pollen, volcanic ash, microscopic organisms drift down through the water column and settle on the lake bed. They settle in thin layers called varves. Each varve typically represents 1 year, a light-colored layer of coarser material deposited in summer when rivers are more active, and a darker, finer layer deposited in winter when things are slow and still. By counting varves and analyzing their content, scientists can reconstruct the climate year by year, going back hundreds of thousands of years. The sediment settles at the angle of repose of that particular material in water. Fine clay particles settle almost flat because they are so light that even the gentlest water movement carries them to the flattest part of the lake bed before they come to rest. Coarser sand settles on the lake's sloping margins at steeper angles, sometimes up to 30 degrees. At the delta where a river enters a lake, sediment fans out in characteristic angles that reflect the angle of repose of the deposited material. Over time, a river delta builds itself into the lake at these angles, creating the layered, lens-shaped deposits that geologists find in ancient rocks and use to identify ancient lakes and rivers. A lake breathes, not in the way an animal breathes, but with a slow, seasonal rhythm. In summer, the sun warms the surface of the lake, and the warm water floats above the cold water below, creating distinct layers, a warm upper layer called the epilimnion, and a cold lower layer called the hypolimnion, separated by a transition zone called the thermocline. Fish that prefer cooler water stay below the thermocline. Fish that prefer warmer water stay above it. The two communities share the same lake, but live at different depths, in different temperatures, in different worlds. In autumn, as the surface water cools, it becomes denser and sinks, mixing with the cold water below. This autumn overturn, as it is called, circulates nutrients from the lake bed up into the sunlit surface waters, creating a brief, productive bloom of algae and plankton. Then winter settles the lake into stillness again. If the lake is in a cold enough climate, it freezes over, and under the ice, the water is surprisingly still and dark and full of quiet life. Ice fishing, practiced for thousands of years by indigenous cultures in northern regions, relies on this stillness. A hole is drilled through the ice. A line is lowered into the cold darkness below. And then you wait, sitting on a surface of frozen water surrounded by an ice-covered landscape, listening to the silence. The fish are somewhere below, moving slowly through water that is almost at freezing point, their metabolism reduced to its minimum. You and they are both near the angle of repose of your respective worlds. You sitting on ice, barely moving, barely using energy. They swimming through cold water, barely eating, barely thinking. Both of you resting in the lowest, quietest gear of your existence. The ducks and geese that winter on open water, on the lakes and rivers that do not freeze entirely, are masters of thermal management. A mallard resting on the surface of a cold lake in winter has tucked its feet, which have no insulating fat, up against its warm body. The feet are cooled by countercurrent heat exchange. Blood flowing from the body to the foot is cooled by blood returning from the foot, so that by the time warm blood reaches the foot, it has already given most of its heat to the returning blood, and by the time cool blood returns to the body, it has been warmed by the outgoing blood. The foot stays just warm enough not to freeze. The bird stays just warm enough to be comfortable. Everything in balance. Everything at the minimum necessary expenditure. The metabolic angle of repose. A heron standing in shallow water is perhaps the most patient creature in the world. It can stand motionless for hours, waiting for a fish to come within range. Its posture, neck folded back in a gentle S-curve, body hunched slightly forward, one leg occasionally lifted and held, is perfectly calibrated to minimize silhouette from below. From a fish's perspective, looking up through the water at the underlit surface, the heron is hard to distinguish from a stick or a reed. When a fish does come within range, the heron strikes with explosive speed, straightening its neck in a motion that takes about 100 milliseconds, driving its beak into the water with pinpoint accuracy. And then it settles back into stillness, as if nothing happened, as if it has always been standing here, as if it intends to stand here forever. The water surface that the heron stands beside has its own quiet geometry. Surface tension, the attraction between water molecules at the surface, creates an invisible skin that allows small objects to float on it, even though they are denser than water. A water strider, the long-legged insect that skates across the surface of still ponds, exploits this skin. Each of its 6 feet rests on the surface at a slight angle, dimpling it but not breaking through. The weight of the insect is distributed across all 6 points, each one pushing the surface down just enough to create a concave dimple, and the surface tension pushing back with equal force. The water strider is at its own angle of repose, balanced between falling in and floating free, held at the surface by the gentlest of forces. Let us travel now to the oldest civilizations of the ancient world and look at the pyramids they left behind, not just in Egypt and Mexico, but in all the other places where the same impulse, the same geometry, appeared again and again, as if the pyramid were not invented, but discovered, as if every civilization, when it grew large enough and still enough to build, simply rediscovered the angle that nature had always known. In Sudan, south of Egypt, the ancient civilization of Meroe built more than 200 pyramids. They are smaller and steeper than their Egyptian counterparts. They rise at angles between 65 and 70 degrees, giving them a sharp, needle-like profile quite different from the broader Egyptian pyramids. They were built between about 700 BCE and 350 CE, and many of them are still standing, though some were damaged by treasure hunters in the 19th century. From a distance, the Meroe pyramids look like a collection of teeth rising from the flat desert. They are astonishing, less visited than their Egyptian counterparts, quieter, more solitary in their landscape. The steeper angle of the Meroe pyramids, 65 to 70 degrees, means they rise faster for a given base width. This results in a narrower, taller shape. It approaches the steepest stable angle for quarried sandstone and limestone, which depends heavily on the quality of the mortar and the precision of the stonework. The Meroe builders compensated for the steeper slope by making the walls slightly thicker relative to the height. The physics demanded it, and the builders, through generations of experience, understood what the physics demanded. In Cambodia, the ancient Khmer civilization built Angkor Wat, the largest religious monument on Earth. Its central tower, rising in 5 stages to a height of about 65 meters, represents Mount Meru, the mythological home of the Hindu gods. The slopes of each stage are carved with intricate relief sculptures and rise at angles of about 70 degrees. Steep, dramatic, symbolic of the challenge of ascending to the divine. But the overall proportions of the temple complex, viewed from above, reveal a series of rectangles nested inside each other, each one smaller than the last, echoing the layered construction of the Egyptian pyramids and the nested shells of the Cholula pyramid. The same idea, the same geometry. On the other side of the world, the construction of Angkor Wat required an estimated 5 to 10 million tons of sandstone blocks, some of them weighing up to 1.5 tons each, quarried from a mountain 40 kilometers away and transported by water on rafts and barges. The Khmer Empire at its height covered most of what is now Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and parts of Vietnam and Malaysia, an empire built on sophisticated water management, including an intricate network of reservoirs, canals, and irrigation channels that supported a population of perhaps 1 million people in the Angkor region alone. At the heart of Angkor is a central reservoir called the West Barai, which is 8 kilometers long and 2.1 kilometers wide. It holds 53 million cubic meters of water. It was built by digging an enormous rectangular depression in the earth and using the excavated material to build the surrounding embankments. The embankments are, and you may already be anticipating this, built at the angle of repose of compacted earth, about 26 to 30 degrees. Not because the engineers wrote down this number, but because that is the angle at which compacted, slightly moist earth naturally holds itself. The reservoir has lasted 1,000 years. The angle was right. In China, the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, Qin Shi Huang, who unified China in 221 BCE, was buried beneath a pyramid-shaped mound that still exists today near the city of Xi'an. The mound is about 51 meters tall and 350 meters across at the base, with slopes of approximately 30 to 32 degrees, built from compacted earth and covered in grass, so that it looks like Cholula, like a natural hill. Inside, according to ancient texts, the emperor's tomb contains an elaborate underground palace with rivers of mercury flowing through channels in the floor, surrounded by bronze sculptures, armies of clay soldiers, and all the riches of the ancient world. Most of the interior has never been excavated. The tomb is still sealed beneath its hill, beneath its angle of repose. The famous terracotta army, the thousands of life-sized clay soldiers buried near the emperor's mound, was discovered in 1974 by farmers digging a well. Since then, archaeologists have excavated 3 large pits containing more than 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, and 670 horses. Each soldier has an individually sculpted face. No two are alike. They were painted in bright colors, red, green, black, white, though the colors faded almost instantly on exposure to air after excavation. Beneath the surface, the army waits in its straight ranks, perfectly still, perfectly in order. An entire army at its angle of repose, at rest, but ready. In India, the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro, part of the Indus Valley civilization which flourished between 2500 and 1900 BCE, featured a large platform mound built of fired brick, approximately 12 meters high, with sloped sides. It is one of the earliest known examples of a raised platform used as a public or ceremonial space in human history. The slope of its sides is, as you might expect, in the range of 30 to 35 degrees. The bricks that were used to build it were fired to a remarkable consistency, with standard dimensions that were maintained across the entire civilization, a uniform building module that allowed construction to proceed without detailed instructions at each site. The builders knew the standard brick, they knew the angle, and the rest followed naturally. If you are still awake and wondering at the quiet persistence of this shape, this gentle slope that appears in sand and lava and ancient stone, and the sides of insect mounds, and the slopes of beaver dams, and the faces of pyramids, then you are feeling what this story has been quietly building toward. The angle of repose is not a human invention. It is not a rule that architects decided to follow. It is a property of the physical world as fundamental as gravity itself. And everywhere that people have built large things that needed to last, Egypt, Mexico, Cambodia, China, Sudan, India, they have discovered it independently. They have found the same angle, because the universe only has one answer to the question of how steep a stable slope can be. Please do not forget to check out the rest of our playlist. There are many more quiet journeys waiting for you there, through forests and oceans and starlit skies. And if this is becoming a regular part of your sleep routine, we would be so grateful for a gentle like. It helps others find their way here too. The mathematics of the pyramid, its proportions, its angles, its relationship between height and base, turns out to be connected to some of the most beautiful and recurring patterns in mathematics. Not because ancient builders knew these patterns intellectually, but because they were building with natural materials under natural gravity. And those conditions nudge construction toward the same proportions that mathematics finds in flowers and shells and galaxies. The ratio of the perimeter of the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza to twice its height is very close to the mathematical constant pi, approximately 3.14159. This could be a coincidence. It could be an intentional design, or it could be something else entirely. It could be a natural consequence of the method of construction. If builders used a wheel to measure distances, rolling it along the base to count off lengths, they would naturally introduce pi into their measurements without any explicit knowledge of the constant. The wheel itself would encode pi into the structure, the way a river encodes curves into a landscape without anyone planning them. The golden ratio, approximately 1.618, appears in the Great Pyramid as well, in the relationship between the slant height and half the base length. Again, this could be intention, but it could also be a natural consequence of building at the angle of repose of quarried limestone, approximately 51 to 52 degrees, which happens to be the angle at which the golden ratio appears in the triangular cross-section of the pyramid. The physics and the mathematics are not two separate things. They are the same thing, seen from different directions. The golden ratio itself appears throughout the natural world, in the spiral arrangement of seeds in a sunflower head, in the branching of trees, in the proportions of nautilus shells, in the pattern of scales on a pine cone. These appearances are not decorative, they are functional. The spiral arrangement of sunflower seeds that follows the golden ratio packs the maximum number of seeds into the minimum area, with each seed receiving optimal light and space. It is the most efficient packing geometry for growing seeds on a circular platform, and it arises spontaneously from the growth rules of the sunflower. No calculation, no plan, just growth following the path of least resistance, which happens to trace the golden spiral. A sunflower follows the sun. Its stem can rotate over the course of the day, turning the face of the flower to track the sun as it moves across the sky from east to west. This behavior, called heliotropism, stops when the plant reaches full maturity. A mature sunflower faces east permanently, catching the morning light, warming its face in the cool early hours when pollinators are most active and most in need of a warm landing pad. The sunflower stops moving, not out of rigidity, but out of purpose. It has found its optimal angle, its angle of repose for the purpose of attracting life. Pine cones, which hang from the branches of pine trees and hold the seeds that will become the next generation of trees, are marvels of engineering. Each scale is a small, stiff flap attached at its base, free to move at its tip. In dry weather, the scales open, spreading outward and upward at an angle of about 30 to 35 degrees from the cone's central axis, to release the winged seeds, which are caught by the wind and carried away. In wet weather, the scales close, pulled down and inward by the hygroscopic wood fibers that expand when wet. To protect the seeds from rain, the cone opens and closes with changes in humidity, using no muscles, no energy, no signals from the tree, just the passive response of wood fibers to moisture. The pine cone breathes in its own slow, wooden way. The angle at which the scales open, 30 to 35 degrees, is within the angle of repose range. This is not coincidence. The scales need to be open just enough to release seeds, but stable enough not to break or tear in wind. A scale at 30 degrees can receive wind pressure without exceeding its structural limits. A scale at 60 degrees would catch too much wind and risk damage. The angle of repose, again, is the equilibrium point between openness and stability, between giving and holding. Fir trees, which are closely related to pines, grow in a shape called an excurrent form, a single central trunk rising straight up with lateral branches coming off in roughly horizontal layers, each layer slightly shorter than the one below, so that the tree as a whole forms a perfect cone. The angle of the cone sides, the angle at which the tree tapers from its widest point at the ground to its tip at the top, is typically between 25 and 40 degrees, depending on species. This is the angle at which the tree sheds snow most efficiently, steep enough for snow to slide off rather than accumulate, while shallow enough to provide the tree with stability in wind. A fir tree is a living pyramid, solving the same problems that human pyramid builders were solving: how to build something tall that does not fall, that sheds the weight of accumulation, that stands in wind and time and the patient pressure of the world. The Norway spruce, which is native to northern and central Europe and commonly planted as a Christmas tree, can live for up to 600 years in the wild. In a Swedish nature reserve, a Norway spruce has been found that is estimated to be over 9,500 years old, one of the oldest living organisms on Earth. The tree you see above ground is not 9,500 years old. The trunk dies and regrows from the same root system, but the roots, quietly persisting beneath the forest floor, have been growing and regenerating since the end of the last ice age. the tree has watched the world change almost beyond recognition. It has been at its angle of repose all along. The story of the angle of repose continues in water, not still water, but moving water, and the way it builds and shapes the world. Rivers carry sediment, sand, silt, gravel, and deposit it when they slow down. Wherever a river slows, it drops its load. And the shape of what it drops is governed always by the angle of repose of that material. Where a river enters a lake or the sea and its current suddenly spreads out and slows, it deposits a fan of sediment called a delta. The word delta comes from the Greek letter delta, the triangle, because the Nile Delta, which the ancient Greeks observed and named, has the shape of that triangular letter as it fans out across northern Egypt into the Mediterranean Sea. The Nile Delta covers about 240 kilometers of coastline and extends about 160 kilometers inland. It is one of the oldest and largest river deltas in the world. It has been building for roughly 65 million years, and the angle at which its sediment fans out from the point where the river mouth begins to widen, the delta slope, is, in the subaqueous portion, between 1 and 5 degrees for the finest silts, and up to 30 degrees for coarser sediments deposited closer to the mouth, all within the angles of repose of those materials underwater. The Nile Delta is one of the most densely populated and agriculturally productive regions in the world, not despite being a zone of deposited sediment, but because of it. The annual flooding of the Nile, which deposited fresh, nutrient-rich silt across the floodplain, made Egypt one of the most productive agricultural regions in the ancient world. It fed the civilization that built the pyramids. The same river that was carrying sediment and depositing it at the angle of repose was carrying the nutrients that allowed a civilization to grow large enough, stable enough, wealthy enough to build monuments to the stars. Alluvial fans are the land-based equivalent of river deltas, where a fast-moving mountain stream exits a narrow canyon onto a flat plain. It spreads out suddenly and deposits its load of sediment in a fan shape. The slope of the fan is steepest near the apex, where the stream exits the canyon, and becomes gentler toward the edges. The overall slope is typically between 2 and 10 degrees for most alluvial fans, depending on the grain size of the sediment and the discharge of the stream. Large alluvial fans, built up over thousands of years by seasonal floods, can be enormous, covering hundreds of square kilometers. From the air, they look like the skirts of mountains spreading outward from the foot of each peak in pale, gentle fans. The valleys between mountain ranges, the intermontane basins of the American West, the wide valleys of Central Asia, the ancient dried lake beds of the Sahara, are floored with the overlapping alluvial fans of dozens or hundreds of mountain streams. Layer upon layer of sediment, each fan deposited at the angle of repose of the material that stream carried, each one adding to the thick sequence of sedimentary rock that geologists will one day read like the pages of a book. Underground, water carves caves. In limestone country, the karst landscapes of Slovenia, China, Kentucky, and the Yucatan Peninsula. Rainwater, slightly acidified by carbon dioxide absorbed from the air, dissolves the limestone along fractures and bedding planes, creating networks of passages and chambers that can extend for hundreds of kilometers. The longest cave system in the world, Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, has over 685 kilometers of mapped passages. Cave formations, stalactites, stalagmites, columns, flow stones, are built by the slow dripping and evaporation of mineral-laden water. A stalactite grows down from the ceiling, one thin ring of calcite at a time, at a rate of perhaps 0.1 to 1 millimeter per year. A large stalactite, a meter long, may be thousands of years old. The angle of a stalactite is always perfectly vertical. It follows gravity exactly because it is built drop by drop under the direct influence of gravity with no competing friction. The angle of repose of a liquid is 0 degrees. It flows to the lowest point and stops there. A stalactite is a frozen record of water falling perfectly straight, perfectly true, for 1,000 years. The cave cricket, a pale, wingless insect that lives its entire life inside caves, has extraordinarily long antennae, sometimes longer than its body. These antennae sense air movement and help it navigate in complete darkness. Cave crickets eat fungi, bat guano, and the occasional dead insect. They have no eyes. They have no need for eyes in a world with no light. They are perfectly adapted to their world in every particular. Long legs for jumping over rock surfaces, long antennae for navigating, pale coloration because pigment is energetically expensive and unnecessary in the dark. The cave cricket has found its angle of repose within evolution itself, the form that costs the least energy and provides the most survival in this very specific, very dark world. The total darkness of a deep cave is unlike any darkness you experience above ground. There is no ambient light whatsoever, not a photon. If you extinguish your light in a deep cave, you cannot see your hand in front of your face, even after your eyes have been adapted for hours. The darkness is absolute. And yet, the cave is full of life. Bacteria on the rock surfaces, fungi on the walls, cave fish with no eyes swimming in underground streams, cave salamanders lying motionless on ledges for weeks at a time, all of them resting, all of them deeply, perfectly at their angle of repose. We have traveled very far tonight, across deserts and jungles, up volcanoes and through caves, along rivers and across lake beds, and everywhere we have gone, we have found the same quiet secret, the angle of repose, the place where falling becomes resting, where motion becomes stillness, where the conversation between gravity and friction reaches its perfect, lasting agreement. Now let us go somewhere even larger, out of the atmosphere, into space, because the angle of repose, this fundamental property of material under gravity, does not stop at Earth's edge. It shapes the universe. The craters on the moon were formed by meteorite impacts. When a meteorite strikes the lunar surface, it excavates a bowl-shaped crater, throwing material outward in all directions. The material, called ejecta, falls back to the surface around the crater and piles up in a rim. The inner walls of a fresh lunar crater are steep, sometimes nearly vertical, just below the rim. But over time, millions of years in the moon's largely weathering-free environment, small meteorite impacts gradually sandblast the slopes, and the fine dust created by all that bombardment slowly slides and settles. The inner walls of older craters are always significantly gentler than fresh ones. They are moving in geological slow motion toward the angle of repose of fine, dry dust in the moon's low gravity. The moon's gravity is about 1/6 of Earth's. Lower gravity means that material can sustain slightly steeper angles, because gravity is pulling each grain less strongly toward the bottom. The angle of repose on the moon is estimated to be about 40 to 45 degrees for fine lunar regolith, compared to 30 to 35 degrees for similar material on Earth. The lunar highlands, the ancient heavily cratered terrain that covers most of the moon's far side, have slopes that reflect this slightly higher lunar angle of repose. The same physics, adjusted for a different gravity. Like a familiar song played in a different key. On Mars, there are volcanoes far larger than any on Earth. Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system, rises 22 kilometers above the Martian surface, nearly 3 times the height of Mount Everest above sea level. Its base diameter is approximately 600 kilometers, and its average slope, measured from the outer edge to the summit, is just 5 degrees, even lower than Hawaii's shield volcanoes. This is because Mars's lower gravity allows lava to flow further before stopping, creating an even wider, flatter base for the same height. The volcano is so wide and so gently sloped that if you stood on its slopes, you would not realize you were on a volcano at all. The horizon would appear flat. You would seem to be on a plain. The angle of repose of Martian lava flows has created a mountain so subtle it is invisible from within. Mars also has enormous canyon systems, most notably Valles Marineris, a network of canyons stretching about 4,000 kilometers across the Martian surface and reaching depths of up to 7 kilometers. The walls of Valles Marineris are in many places nearly vertical. It is a very young geological feature, perhaps only a few 100 million years old. But in some areas, mass wasting has occurred, rock falling from the upper walls to form talus slopes at the base. And those talus slopes hold the angle of repose appropriate to Martian gravity and Martian rock. Scientists studying the slopes of Valles Marineris from orbit can estimate the properties of Martian rock simply by measuring the angles of the talus piles. The angle tells you what the material is. On the asteroid Ryugu, visited by the Japanese space probe Hayabusa 2, scientists found that the surface is covered in loose gravel and boulders with very little fine material. The slopes on Ryugu, measured from high-resolution imagery, show angles clustering around 30 degrees, close to the angle of repose of loose gravel under the asteroid's very weak gravity. The same angle. On a rock 900 meters across, floating in the asteroid belt, with gravity barely 1/80,000th of Earth's. The same conversation between falling and staying, translated into the language of microgravity. Saturn's rings, the most famous rings in the solar system, are made of ice particles ranging in size from tiny grains to boulders tens of meters across. These particles orbit Saturn in a thin disk, and the disk's thinness, the rings are typically only about 10 to 100 meters thick despite being hundreds of thousands of kilometers wide, is a result of a kind of collective angle of repose in orbital mechanics. Particles that are in the plane of the rings have their orbits stabilized by their mutual interactions. Particles that stray out of the plane are pulled back by the combined gravity of Saturn and the ring particles themselves. The result is an equilibrium state, the thinnest possible disk that the dynamics of the system allow. The rings are at their own angle of repose in the curved geometry of orbital space. The Milky Way galaxy itself is a disk. Our galaxy is about 100,000 light-years across and approximately 1,000 light-years thick. an enormous, thin, flat structure. The disk formed because, as the galaxy's gas and dust collapsed under gravity, any net rotation caused it to flatten into the plane of that rotation, the same way a spinning ball of dough flattens into a disk as it rotates. The galaxy's disk is the angle of repose of rotating gas under its own gravity, the same physics that makes a pile of sand flatten to 33 degrees, expressed across 100,000 light years. You are lying at the bottom of an enormous gravity well tonight. The Earth holds you. The solar system turns around you. The galaxy turns around all of it. And everything, from the grain of sand to the spiral arm, has settled into the geometry that gravity and motion together prefer. You are not just resting on a planet. You are resting in the angle of repose of a universe that has been finding its balance for 13 billion years. We are coming slowly and gently toward the end of our journey tonight. But before we arrive, let us rest for a while in a few more quiet places, places that carry the geometry of the angle of repose in unexpected and beautiful ways. Snowflakes, each one a tiny, six-sided crystal of ice, falling through cold air, growing as it falls by capturing water molecules from the air around it. No two snowflakes are identical. This is often said, and it is essentially true, because the precise sequence of temperatures and humidity levels that a snowflake passes through as it falls is essentially unrepeatable. But all snowflakes are built on the same hexagonal lattice, the angle of 60 degrees between the arms, which is a direct consequence of the geometry of water molecules bonding in ice crystals. The 60-degree angle is the angle of repose of the molecular structure itself, the arrangement that minimizes energy and maximizes stability at the scale of atoms. When snow falls and accumulates on the ground, it piles at the angle of repose of fresh snow, about 38 to 55 degrees on a surface, depending on the temperature and the crystal structure of the snow. Fresh, dry, powdery snow can hold a steeper angle than wet, heavy snow because the branching ice crystals interlock with each other like tiny Velcro hooks. But any snow on a steep slope above its angle of repose will eventually slide. The sound of a snow cornice, the overhanging lip of snow that forms on the downwind side of a ridge, cracking and falling, is one of the sounds that mountain guides listen for most carefully. It is the sound of the angle of repose asserting itself, the sound of equilibrium being restored. Hoarfrost, the crystalline ice that forms on cold surfaces on still, clear nights, grows in a very different way from snow. While snowflakes fall through air, hoarfrost grows in place. Water vapor from the air freezing directly onto the cold surface in a process called deposition. The crystals grow outward from the surface in complex branching patterns, sometimes several centimeters long, forming feathery white coatings on grass, spiderwebs, fence posts, and leaves. In the early morning light, a field covered in hoarfrost looks like it has been visited overnight by a patient, invisible artist who had nothing but ice and time and air. The spiderweb coated in hoarfrost is one of the most beautiful small structures in the natural world. Each silk thread is outlined in tiny ice crystals, making it visible and permanent seeming against the pale morning sky. Normally, a spiderweb is nearly invisible. A spiderweb so visible is perhaps also a spiderweb that has failed at its purpose, since its prey can now see and avoid it. But the hoarfrost spiderweb is temporarily a different kind of structure, not a trap, but a geometry, a record of how the spider solved the problem of connecting center to edge in the most efficient possible way. The spider's spiral orb web is, mathematically, a logarithmic spiral, the same spiral seen in nautilus shells and galaxy arms and the branching of trees. The spider does not know this. It simply builds by instinct, laying out radial threads first, then filling in the spiral from the outside in, using its own body length as a rough gauge for the spacing between spiral threads. The resulting web is maximally efficient at two things: capturing flying insects and surviving wind. The spiral shape allows the web to deflect rather than resist the force of wind. It deforms under stress, but returns to its original shape after the wind passes. The web at rest is at its angle of repose. Under stress, it temporarily deforms. And when the stress is removed, it returns, like an exhale after a deep breath. Rain on a spider web is another transformation. Each drop hangs from a thread at the lowest point of a tiny arc, pulled down by gravity to exactly the point where its weight is balanced by the thread's tension. The drop does not fall. It hangs. It catches the light. On a morning after rain, when the web is hung with dozens of drops, each one a tiny lens reflecting the garden and the sky, it looks like a necklace made by someone who loved the world, each drop at its angle of repose, perfectly placed, perfectly still. The dew that forms on grass in the early morning, not frost, but liquid water condensed from warm air meeting the cooled surface of the grass blade, forms in drops that roll along the surface of the blade toward the lowest point, collecting at the tip before falling. In some plants, the leaf surface is coated in microscopic wax structures that make it superhydrophobic. Water rolls off it immediately, gathering dust and impurities as it goes and carrying them away. The lotus plant is famous for this. Its leaves stay clean even in muddy water because nothing can adhere to the surface long enough to stick. Engineers have copied this structure in waterproof coatings and self-cleaning surfaces. The angle of repose of a water drop on a lotus leaf is essentially zero. It just rolls off. It is too clean to stop. There is a moment in the morning, just before you are fully awake, when you are neither asleep nor conscious, when you are exactly at the angle of repose between dreaming and waking. The body is still and heavy. The mind is soft and open. Thoughts come and go without catching. The room is quiet. The light, if any comes through, is gentle. This state is called hypnopompia, and many people find it extraordinarily peaceful, more peaceful even than sleep itself, because there is a faint awareness of the peace, a quiet witnessing of stillness, the brain in its own angle of repose. If you have found this playlist before, or if this is your first time visiting us here, we would love for you to leave a comment letting us know what brought you to the Sleepy Nature channel. Every comment is a small gift, and we read them all. And if you have found a favorite episode, do share it with someone who might need it. The angle of repose of kindness is to pass it along. And so we come very softly to the end of our long journey through the world of angles, pyramids, and the quiet physics of rest. We began with a handful of sand, a tiny pile on a beach formed by the opening of a hand settling into a miniature mountain no taller than a thumb. And from there we traveled to the Great Pyramids of Egypt and their precise 51.8-degree faces, to the jungle temples of the Maya, to the volcanic slopes of Japan and Hawaii, to the talus piles of the high mountains, to the beaver's dam and the termite's mound, to the frozen sea, to the spider web hung with morning drops, all the way out to the rings of Saturn and the disk of the Milky Way. And in all of those places, across every scale, every material, every civilization, every world, we found the same thing, the same conversation, the same agreement between falling and staying, the same quiet wisdom of the angle of repose. It is not a dramatic thing, this angle. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply appears wherever the conditions are right, wherever material is piling and gravity is pulling and friction is holding. And it says, here, this far, this steep, and no more. The Great Pyramid of Giza has been standing at its 51.8 degrees for 4,500 years. It has seen empires rise and dissolve. It has been buried in sand and excavated. It has been measured and photographed and climbed and theorized about by more people than we can count. And through all of that, it has not moved. It is not going anywhere. It is at its angle of repose, and it will remain there, patient and certain, long after everything we are worried about tonight is past. There is something deeply comforting in that. The world is built to last when it is built at the right angle. Mountains find their shape over millions of years and stay. Sand dunes wander, but always maintain their slope. Pyramids stand while civilizations come and go around them. Everything that has found its angle of repose has found its peace. Tonight, you have found yours. You are lying at the angle your body most prefers. Your breathing has slowed to the pace that your body knows is right. Your muscles have released the last of the day's small tensions. Your mind is soft, like damp sand, able to hold a shape, but not insisting on any particular one. Think now, very gently, of that first handful of sand, the tiny hill it made, the perfect, peaceful slope of it, each grain at rest against its neighbor, each one held there by the lightest possible touch, the whole pile quiet and warm, lit by the last light of a day that is over. That is what rest feels like. That is what you are doing right now, grain by grain, layer by layer. You have settled into your own angle of repose. The conversation between activity and stillness is over for tonight. Stillness has won, gently, as it always does. Let your eyes close completely now, if they have not already. Let your breath do what it knows how to do. Let the weight of your body be fully held by whatever is beneath you. You do not need to hold yourself up. Gravity is doing that. The same gravity that holds the pyramid. The same gravity that holds the dune. The same gravity that holds the galaxy in its slow, patient turn. You are held. You are safe. You are at rest. And the world, this old, quiet, perfectly angled world, is resting alongside you. Good night.
Bye bye.